Chinese tourist annoyed the king's guard. But there was one thing that she was most excited about, seeing the famous king's guard. Mei Lin had heard so much about them from friends, online videos, and travel blogs. The guards in their striking red uniforms and black bearskin hats, standing perfectly still like statues in front of Buckingham Palace, had always fascinated her. She had read that these guards were known for their discipline. In fact, they were so serious about their job that they could stand for hours without even blinking an eye. The idea of seeing them up close was enough to make her heart race with anticipation. As soon as Mei Lin exited the airport, she felt the cool London breeze against her face. She could already sense the buzz of the city, the hustle and bustle of people rushing to work, the sound of cars honking, the chatter of tourists in all languages, and the hum of excitement in the air. But Mei Lin had one goal in mind: Buckingham Palace. She hopped into a taxi, and through her limited English, managed to tell the driver where she wanted to go. As the car made its way through the busy streets, she couldn't help but gaze out of the window, admiring the grand buildings, the green parks, and the iconic red double-decker buses. Everything seemed so different from Beijing, where she had grown up. When the taxi finally pulled up in front of Buckingham Palace, Mei Lin could hardly believe her eyes. The palace stood tall and majestic, its grand gates shining under the soft light of the afternoon sun. She paid the driver and stepped out, her heart pounding. This was it, the place she had seen in countless photos and documentaries. It felt surreal to actually be standing in front of it. The first thing she noticed was how many people were gathered around the gates. Tourists from all over the world were taking photos, speaking in different languages, and marveling at the palace. Some were sitting on the grass, others were chatting excitedly with friends. But Mei Lin wasn't interested in just the palace itself. No, her focus was on something else: the king's guard. She spotted them immediately. Two tall guards stood silently in front of the palace gates, their red coats bright against the gray stone of the palace behind them. They were perfectly still like statues, with their black bearskin hats perched on their heads. Mei Lin had heard stories about how the guards never moved or smiled, no matter what happened around them. People had tried to make them smile to get them to react, but the guards were always unfazed. Mei Lin, being a curious and playful person, was instantly intrigued. How do they do it? She wondered. How can they stand still for so long without moving or even blinking? With her camera in hand, Mei Lin approached the guards, trying to get the best angle for a photo. The guards remained motionless. Mei Lin couldn't help but laugh to herself. She had seen so many photos of these guards, but now she was standing in front of them, ready to take her own picture. It felt like a dream. She raised her camera and clicked a photo, then another, and another. She moved closer, trying to capture the details of the uniforms, the bright red coats, the gold buttons, and the polished black boots that gleamed in the sunlight. She could hear other tourists around her taking photos as well. The atmosphere was lighthearted, with people exchanging jokes and stories. Mei Lin felt a sense of excitement, as if she were part of something historic. But as she took more photos, she started to feel a little bold. I wonder, she thought, if I can get a selfie with one of them. The idea made her smile. She had seen so many funny photos of people posing with the guards, and many tourists had claimed they'd been able to get a quick picture with them. Surely, it couldn't hurt to ask, right? She stepped closer to one of the guards, a tall man with a sharp uniform and a serious face. Mei Lin hesitated for a moment, but then, feeling confident, she raised her hand and waved it in front of his face. He didn't even flinch. She waved again. Still no reaction. Mei Lin giggled to herself. I wonder if he can hear me, she thought. She tried speaking to him in simple English. Hello, could I take a selfie with you? The guard didn't respond. His face remained as stiff and serious as ever, his eyes fixed straight ahead. But Mei Lin was not discouraged. In fact, she found it even more amusing that he wasn't reacting at all. The idea of testing his patience made her more determined. She took another step closer and raised her phone, aiming to take the perfect selfie with the still, stoic figure beside her. By now, the crowd around her had started to notice what she was doing. A few tourists looked at her curiously. Some smiled and whispered among themselves. Others chuckled, thinking she was just another tourist trying to get a funny picture. Mei Lin wasn't bothered by the attention. In fact, she was enjoying it. She kept trying to position herself in different ways, hoping to capture the perfect shot. But no matter how many times she took a photo, the guard didn't move an inch. His face remained a mask of discipline, unchanging and unmoving. Mei Lin felt like she had cracked some kind of mystery. It's amazing, she thought. These guys are so serious. I wonder how they do it. As the minutes passed, Mei Lin began to feel like the center of attention. Other tourists gathered around her, some offering tips on how to take better photos with the guard, others commenting on her bravery to get so close. Some even asked her if she was planning to make the guard laugh. Mei Lin just smiled, feeling proud of her small victory of having gotten so close to the legendary King's Guard without any reaction. But as the crowd grew larger, so did the noise. People were chatting more loudly, some laughing at the jokes they were making about Mei Lin's antics. It was starting to feel less like a quiet, respectful moment and more like a playful scene. Mei Lin, still unaware of the seriousness of the situation, kept snapping photos, oblivious to the small shift in the atmosphere around her. She couldn't help but think about how funny it would be if she somehow managed to get the guard to smile or even laugh. After all, it was nearly impossible for anyone to stand perfectly still all the time, wasn't it? Surely, a tiny bit of interaction would make them break their serious composure. Mei Lin was determined to find out. And so, with each passing second, she inched closer to the guard, eager for a new reaction, not knowing that what had started as a harmless attempt at fun was about to create a small stir. As Mei Lin continued taking photos of the King's Guard, she became more and more determined to get the perfect shot. The guards, however, remained completely still, like statues. Their posture was perfect, and their faces were as serious as ever. Mei Lin couldn't help but admire their discipline. But as she stood there, an idea began to form in her mind. She thought to herself, what if I could get a little closer, maybe take a selfie with one of them? Wouldn't that be so funny? She glanced around at the other tourists. Some of them were taking casual photos, some were snapping quick selfies with the palace in the background, and others were simply enjoying the moment. But none of them seemed to be interacting with the guards directly. Mei Lin, though, was feeling bold today. She had come all the way to London after all. Why not have a little fun with it? Without thinking too much, she took a few steps forward, closing the distance between herself and the nearest guard. She still couldn't believe she was standing so close to one of the most famous figures in the world, an actual King's Guard. Her heart beat a little faster as she thought about how cool it would be to have a selfie with him. At first, she only meant to stand near him, but as she raised her phone to take a photo, something strange happened. The guard didn't react at all. He just kept staring straight ahead, his eyes focused on some invisible point in the distance. Mei Lin found this fascinating. She tried to wave her hand in front of his face, just to see if she could get any kind of reaction, but no reaction came. Mei Lin smiled to herself, thinking that the guard's ability to stay still was almost like a superpower. Maybe he's not human, she joked to herself. Maybe he's just a robot programmed to stand there all day. Feeling more playful than ever, she moved even closer. She was now standing just a few feet away from the guard, her phone held high, ready to capture the perfect photo. She could feel the excitement building inside her. This is going to be amazing, she thought, as she tried to adjust her angle for the selfie. She even took a few quick shots, all the while giggling under her breath at how silly she must look to the other tourists. But when she looked at the photos, she realized something. The guard hadn't moved a single inch. It was like she wasn't even there. No smile, no movement, not even a twitch of his eyes. Mei Lin stared at the photos in disbelief. She was getting closer to him, waving her hand, and yet he remained the same. It was like trying to get a picture with a stone statue. A little frustrated, Mei Lin decided to step things up. She knew that the king's guard were serious, but maybe she could push it just a bit more. After all, she had seen videos online where people would try to make the guards laugh or smile, and some even succeeded. Maybe it was all about timing, or maybe it was about persistence. She leaned forward and said, "Hey, do you mind if I take a selfie with you? Just one quick photo, I promise." Her voice was sweet, almost pleading. But again, the guard said nothing. Mei Lin wasn't discouraged. She decided to try again, this time taking a few steps closer. She was standing right beside him now, so close that she could almost feel the heat from his uniform. She raised her phone one more time, aiming for the perfect selfie. As she got ready to click the button, she noticed something. The guard's posture seemed slightly different. His shoulders were a bit straighter, and his eyes seemed to narrow just slightly. It was almost like he was aware of her presence but still refusing to respond. She had to admit, this was both strange and fascinating. Mei Lin's curiosity only grew. What was it about this man, standing perfectly still all day, that made him so special? Why was he so dedicated to his role? Did he get tired of standing there? Or was it just another day in the life of a guard? "Okay, this is going to be good," Mei Lin whispered to herself, but before she could take another shot, something unexpected happened. A voice behind her broke the silence. "Excuse me, miss," the voice said politely, yet firmly. Mei Lin turned around to find a second guard, standing at attention a few feet away. He was a little older than the first guard, but he had the same stern expression and the same perfect posture. Mei Lin's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't noticed this second guard until now. He had been watching her, and now he was stepping forward to address her. "I'm going to have to ask you to step back," the second guard said, his tone not unkind but serious. "You're getting a little too close. It's not appropriate to touch or disturb the guards while they're on duty." Mei Lin blinked, feeling a little taken aback. She hadn't meant any harm. She was just trying to have a little fun. But she could see now that the second guard wasn't going to let her off easily. His eyes were focused, and there was no hint of a smile on his face. He was definitely not here to joke around. "Oh, I'm sorry," Mei Lin said quickly, stepping back a few paces. "I just wanted to take a selfie. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." The second guard nodded slightly but didn't soften his expression. "It's important to respect the guards and the ceremony," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Please keep your distance." Mei Lin, now a little embarrassed, gave a small nod of her own. She wasn't used to being scolded by someone in such a polite yet serious way. She glanced back at the first guard, still standing perfectly still, and for a moment she wondered what it would be like to have such an unwavering dedication to a job. For a second, she thought about apologizing again, but she didn't want to make things more awkward. She quietly stepped away from the guards and wandered toward a group of tourists who had gathered nearby. They were all staring at her now, some with curious looks, others with faint smiles, as if they had been watching her little interaction with the guards. One of the tourists, a young man with a camera hanging around his neck, looked at Mei Lin and shrugged. "Well, at least you tried," he said with a grin. "Most people just take a picture from far away." Mei Lin chuckled nervously, still feeling a little embarrassed. "I didn't realize the guards were so serious," she admitted. "I just thought it would be funny to take a selfie with them." The young man laughed. "Yeah, they don't mess around, but don't worry. You're not the first one to try. I've seen people trying to get them to smile or wave for photos." As Mei Lin walked away, she couldn't help but laugh at herself. She had come all the way to London, and the first thing she did was try to make one of the most disciplined military units in the world break their composure. What was I thinking? She asked herself. But as she turned back one last time to look at the guards, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of respect. The guards were still standing there, unmoving, unshaken by the small chaos that had just unfolded around them. Mei Lin realized that, in a way, the guards were more than just a tourist attraction. They were part of something much bigger, part of a tradition that had lasted for centuries. Maybe I can learn a thing or two from them, she thought, as she turned and headed toward the palace gates, ready to explore the rest of London. After Mei Lin's interaction with the King's Guard, she walked away feeling both a little embarrassed and oddly fascinated. She had learned a valuable lesson that day. The King's Guard was not to be messed with. But at the same time, she couldn't help but admire their dedication and discipline. She had seen the seriousness of the guards roll up close, and for a moment she almost felt bad for having tried to get so close to him. But as soon as she took a few steps away, her curiosity got the better of her. As she wandered around Buckingham Palace, she kept thinking about the guards. Their stillness had been incredible, almost like they were statues, frozen in time. How could anyone stand there in the same position for hours without moving? Mei Lin was sure she couldn't do it. She would get so bored. But the more she thought about it, the more she felt like she had to understand why the guards were so serious. Why didn't they smile? Why didn't they move, even when a tourist like her tried to engage them? Her mind was racing with questions when she suddenly heard the sound of military boots clicking against the cobblestone ground. It was the familiar rhythm of a new guard coming to relieve the first one. Mei Lin was excited to see the changing of the guard for the first time. She had seen it on TV, but nothing compared to seeing it live. It was a grand tradition, filled with ceremony and precision, and it was happening right in front of her. She walked over to the crowd that had gathered near the gates. There were families, other tourists, and a few locals, all eagerly waiting to watch the ceremonial exchange. Mei Lin stood on her toes to get a better view. The excitement in the air was contagious. Tourists were all pointing their cameras, some filming, others trying to take pictures of the guards as they slowly moved into position. It was like a performance, each guard stepping with perfect synchronization, their movements as sharp and controlled as the sound of their boots striking the pavement. Mei Lin was so caught up in the spectacle that she almost forgot about the small warning she had received earlier. But as she looked around, she saw something that made her stop in her tracks. Standing a few feet away, close to where the guards were preparing for the change, was a palace officer. He wasn't dressed in the same uniform as the guards, but he had an air of authority that caught Mei Lin's attention. He was wearing a blue military-style jacket, and his posture was just as strict and commanding as the guards themselves. He wasn't just a bystander. He was there to make sure everything went smoothly. Mei Lin recognized him instantly. He was the one who had spoken to her earlier. The officer's gaze swept over the crowd, and it seemed like his eyes locked with hers for just a moment. Mei Lin quickly looked away, feeling a little guilty. She wasn't trying to cause trouble, but she couldn't help but wonder if he was watching her because of what had happened with the guard earlier. The last thing she wanted was to be kicked out of the palace grounds for being too pushy with the guards. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that she was here to enjoy the sights and learn about British traditions, not to make waves. But then, to her surprise, the officer took a few steps toward her and the crowd, his boots clicking sharply against the stones. He stopped right in front of Mei Lin and looked at her with a serious but not unfriendly expression. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice firm but calm. Mei Lin's heart skipped a beat. She looked up at him and his gaze was unwavering. It wasn't a look of anger but more like a reminder. "I'm going to ask you to please keep your distance from the guards. It's important that we respect their position and the ceremony they're carrying out." Mei Lin blinked in surprise. She hadn't realized that the situation had become serious enough for a palace officer to intervene. She quickly apologized, feeling a little embarrassed. "Oh, I'm really sorry," she said, stepping back. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I was just taking pictures." The officer nodded slightly, but his expression remained serious. "I understand that you're a tourist, and it's wonderful that you want to enjoy the ceremony. But the guards are here to perform a specific duty, and they must not be disturbed in any way." Mei Lin's cheeks turned pink. She had never thought about it that way. Of course, she understood that the guards had a job to do, but she had been so focused on her own curiosity that she hadn't fully considered the seriousness of the situation. She felt a little guilty now, as if she had been disrespectful to the tradition and the people involved in it. "I didn't realize," Mei Lin said, her voice softer now. "I didn't mean to disrespect anyone. I just thought. I don't know. Maybe I could get a picture with them or something." The officer gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I understand," he said, "but the guards cannot engage with the public. It's part of their duty. They're here to perform their role with the utmost professionalism, and their conduct reflects the respect and discipline of the entire ceremony." Mei Lin nodded, feeling a little foolish. She had always admired the professionalism of the British military, but now she was beginning to understand just how much it mattered. It wasn't just a job for the guards. It was a commitment to tradition, to history, and to the respect of the British people. "I'll make sure to stay back," Mei Lin said, giving a small bow of apology. The officer nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. Before he turned to leave, he added, "Enjoy the rest of your visit and thank you for understanding." As he walked away, Mei Lin took a moment to reflect on what had just happened. She realized that, in her excitement, she had not fully understood the importance of the King's Guard and the ceremony that took place at Buckingham Palace. What had started as a fun adventure to take a selfie had turned into an important lesson about respect for tradition. Mei Lin felt a little embarrassed, but also grateful for the officer's calm explanation. She had learned something new that day, something that went beyond the excitement of sightseeing or trying to get the perfect photo. It was about understanding the culture and the history that made places like Buckingham Palace so special. It was about respecting the people who kept those traditions alive. As the changing of the guard continued, Mei Lin watched with new appreciation. The guards moved in perfect unison, their boots clicking in time, their faces still and stern. She could see now that they weren't just standing there for show. They were a living part of British history, an embodiment of discipline, respect, and commitment. A small smile crossed Mei Lin's face as she stood there, a little wiser than she had been when she first arrived. She wasn't just a tourist anymore. She had become a part of the story of the place, understanding, respecting, and appreciating the traditions that made it all so special. Mei Lin had thought the worst was over. She had learned her lesson after the officer's warning. She had taken a step back, shown respect for the King's Guard, and even tried to adjust her expectations for the rest of her visit. But as she stood in the crowd, watching the changing of the guard ceremony with more appreciation than before, she couldn't shake the feeling that something else might happen. It wasn't that she was expecting trouble, but after the earlier events, her curiosity still hadn't quite faded. She was fascinated by the precision of the guards, how they could stand so still and composed despite all the noise and attention from the tourists. What made them so disciplined? What kept them from reacting to even the silliest distractions? For a moment, Mei Lin allowed herself to simply watch the ceremony unfold. She admired the grace with which the guards moved, the synchrony of their steps, and how they handled the moment with such dignity. It was unlike anything she had ever seen before, and she had to admit, the experience was far more impressive than any viral video she had ever watched online. This was the real deal, history being made right before her eyes. But as the ceremony continued, Mei Lin's curiosity slowly began to rise again. She could feel the itch to get just one more photo, one last memory to capture this incredible moment. She knew she had been warned already, but there was a small voice in her head telling her to push just a little further. What harm could it do to try again? The thought crept into her mind like a whisper, and before she knew it, Mei Lin found herself stepping a little closer to the guards. She told herself that she was only going to take one more picture, one that would show the guard in all his glory against the backdrop of Buckingham Palace. Surely, that would be fine. Her hand reached for her phone again. She glanced around, making sure no officers were in sight. The crowd was still focused on the guards, some of them pointing their cameras, others talking excitedly to one another about the grand ceremony. Mei Lin quickly lifted her phone and aimed it at the guard closest to her. She had the perfect shot in mind, a close-up of the guard with his bearskin hat, his red uniform standing out against the gray skies of London. But just as she was about to click the shutter, she took a step too far. It wasn't much, just a small movement to position herself better, but it was enough to get the guard's attention. Mei Lin had crossed a line she didn't even realize was there. The guard, who had been standing so perfectly still up until that moment, suddenly shifted his posture. His shoulders squared, his back straightened, and his head tilted ever so slightly toward Mei Lin. For the briefest moment, Mei Lin felt a rush of excitement, as if she had just triggered a response, a sign that the guard might break his calm exterior. But then, it happened. With the precision of a trained soldier, the guard took one sharp step toward Mei Lin, blocking her view of the rest of the ceremony. It wasn't aggressive, but it was certainly deliberate. The movement was so fast, so sudden, that Mei Lin froze. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't thought her actions would lead to such a response. The guard's stoic expression remained unchanged, but there was no mistaking the message he was sending. Do not cross this line. Mei Lin's heart skipped a beat. She felt her face flush with a mix of embarrassment and surprise. The guard's movement had been so swift, so controlled, that for a moment she felt like she was standing in front of a brick wall. She had overstepped, and now there was no going back. But before she could react, a voice interrupted the stillness. "Excuse me, miss," came a calm yet firm voice from behind her. Mei Lin turned around and saw another palace officer standing a few feet away, his expression serious. The officer, dressed in a dark blue jacket and trousers, approached her with purpose, his boots clicking sharply against the stone ground. He was tall, his presence commanding, and Mei Lin immediately felt the weight of his gaze. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the officer held up a hand, signaling for her to remain quiet. "I need you to step away from the guards," he said, his voice polite but stern. "You're disrupting the ceremony." Mei Lin's stomach dropped. She had never felt so exposed. She could feel the eyes of the other tourists on her as they subtly turned to watch the interaction unfold. Some of them whispered to each other, some gave her sympathetic looks, and others just seemed to watch with mild amusement. Mei Lin wished she could disappear. What was wrong with me? Why couldn't I just leave well enough alone? "I'm really sorry," Mei Lin said quickly, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I just wanted to take a picture." She took a step back, hoping that the officer would understand. "I didn't think I was doing anything wrong." The officer didn't say anything right away. Instead, he looked at her with a measured gaze, as if trying to decide how best to handle the situation. His silence only made Mei Lin more anxious. She could hear the faint sound of the changing of the guard continuing behind her, but it felt like everything around her had slowed down. Her face was burning with embarrassment. She wasn't used to being reprimanded like this, especially not in such a public setting. Finally, the officer spoke. "It's important to respect the guards and their duty. They are not here for entertainment, and they must not be disturbed while on duty. The ceremony you're witnessing is part of a long-standing tradition. We ask that all visitors respect it." Mei Lin nodded quickly, feeling guilty. She had been so caught up in her excitement, in her desire to get that perfect picture, that she had completely lost sight of the bigger picture. She had been so focused on herself, on her experience, that she hadn't thought about the respect and history that the ceremony represented. "I understand," Mei Lin said quietly. "I'm really sorry." The officer seemed to soften just a little at her apology. "I know you didn't mean any harm, but please, in the future, remember that the guards are here for a reason. They are part of the history of this country." Mei Lin nodded again, feeling ashamed of her behavior. She couldn't believe how far she had gone just to get a photo. The guard, the officer, and the tradition of the ceremony, these were all things that deserved respect. She had learned that the hard way. "Thank you for understanding," the officer said, giving her a brief nod before turning back to watch the ceremony. Mei Lin, still feeling a little dazed, took a few steps back and joined the rest of the crowd. She stood quietly for a moment, watching the guards with a newfound respect. The changing of the guard was more than just a tourist attraction. It was a reminder of the importance of tradition, discipline, and respect for the roles people play in society. As Mei Lin stood there, her phone forgotten in her hand, she felt a sense of quiet understanding settle over her. She wasn't just a visitor in London anymore. She was a witness to something bigger than herself, a piece of living history. And from that moment on, Mei Lin knew she would never look at the King's Guard the same way again. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Mei Lin, still feeling the sting of her earlier interaction with the King's Guard and the palace officer, wandered around Buckingham Palace, trying to shake off the embarrassment. She kept replaying the scene in her head, the officer's stern voice, the guard stepping toward her, and the realization that she had overstepped her boundaries. It wasn't that she had meant any harm. It was just that she had been so wrapped up in her own excitement that she hadn't thought about how her actions were affecting others. As Mei Lin walked through the palace grounds, the weight of what had happened began to sink in. She realized that she had come to London as a tourist, eager to see the famous landmarks and take photographs, but she hadn't really taken the time to understand the meaning behind what she was witnessing. She had been so focused on getting the perfect photo that she had missed the deeper significance of the King's Guard and their role in British history. By the time she reached the palace gates again, Mei Lin had made a decision. She wasn't going to let the awkward incident ruin her day. Instead of feeling embarrassed or upset, she chose to use the experience as a learning opportunity. She had come to London to experience something new, and that's exactly what had happened. She had learned something important about respect, tradition, and the value of slowing down to appreciate the culture around her. As the sun began to set over Buckingham Palace, Mei Lin sat on a nearby bench, taking in the beauty of the scene. The changing of the guard was over, and the crowds had started to thin out. She was surrounded by a few tourists, some of whom were still taking pictures, but there was a sense of peace in the air. The palace stood tall and majestic, its grandeur almost overwhelming. The guards, now standing at their posts again, were as still and silent as ever, but Mei Lin no longer saw them as mere statues to be photographed. She saw them as a living piece of history, standing firm and proud in their role as protectors of the monarchy. The officer's words echoed in her mind. "The ceremony you're witnessing is part of a long-standing tradition. We ask that all visitors respect it." Mei Lin understood now. The guards weren't just a tourist attraction. They were symbols of the country's history, commitment, and pride. Their unwavering discipline was a reflection of the values that had shaped Britain for centuries. She took a deep breath and pulled out her phone, but this time, she wasn't trying to capture the perfect shot. Instead, she simply took a photo of the palace, the guards standing motionless in front of it. The photo wasn't anything special, but it felt different from the others she had taken earlier. It wasn't just about the picture anymore. It was about the moment, the experience, and the respect she had gained for the tradition. She felt a sense of gratitude for having been able to witness such a meaningful part of British culture. As Mei Lin sat there, A gentle breeze ruffling her hair, she thought about how her perception of London had changed since she first arrived. At the beginning of her trip, she had been focused on seeing the sights, checking things off her list. But now she understood that there was so much more to this city than just its landmarks. It was the people, the history, and the traditions that gave the city its unique character. It was the same with the King's Guard. What had seemed like an amusing photo opportunity at first had turned into a deeper understanding of the role they played in the country's heritage. As the evening sun dipped lower in the sky, Mei Lin decided to leave Buckingham Palace and explore the rest of the city. She felt more connected to London than she had when she first arrived, and she was eager to discover more of what the city had to offer. But as she walked away from the palace gates, she paused for a moment and turned back. The guards were still standing there, stoic and unyielding, and for the first time, Mei Lin didn't see them as objects for her to photograph. She saw them as guardians of a proud tradition, part of something much bigger than herself. Later that evening, back at her hotel, Mei Lin shared her experience with her fellow travelers. She told them about the King's Guard and how she had almost made a fool of herself by trying to get too close. Her new friends listened with amusement, but Mei Lin couldn't help but laugh at herself too. "I guess I learned my lesson the hard way," she said, shaking her head. "It's not just about getting the perfect picture, it's about respecting what you're witnessing. Some things deserve to be appreciated without interference." Her friends nodded in agreement, some offering their own stories of cultural misunderstandings and moments of learning during their travels. Mei Lin felt a sense of camaraderie with them. It was nice to know that everyone had moments where they had to adjust their expectations and learn along the way. Travel wasn't just about the places you saw. It was about the lessons you learned, the people you met, and the growth that came from it all. Later that night, as Mei Lin scrolled through her social media feed, she decided to post a photo of the palace. It wasn't a dramatic close-up of the guards or a selfie with them. It was a simple shot of the palace at sunset, with the guards standing watch in the background. She captioned the photo, "A lesson in respect and tradition. Sometimes the best memories are the ones we don't try too hard to capture." The post received a lot of likes and comments, many of them expressing appreciation for the peaceful and respectful tone of her message. Some people even commented on how they had similar experiences of realizing that travel wasn't always about seeking the perfect picture. It was about immersing yourself in the culture and taking the time to understand the places you visited. Mei Lin smiled as she read through the comments. She had come to London hoping for an adventure, and she had certainly found one. But more importantly, she had learned that some of the best adventures weren't the ones that made the perfect Instagram posts. They were the ones that taught you something deeper, something meaningful. It wasn't just about the sights you saw, it was about how you saw them. The next morning, as Mei Lin packed her bags to head to her next destination, she felt a sense of contentment. London had given her more than she had expected. She had come for the landmarks, the history, and the excitement, but she was leaving with something even more valuable, a deeper understanding of the importance of respect for tradition, culture, and the experiences that come with travel. As she boarded the train to her next adventure, Mei Lin felt grateful for the lessons she had learned. And she knew that, wherever her travels would take her next, she would always carry these lessons with her, ready to approach each new destination with a little more respect and a lot more curiosity.